So the title of this conference is The Space Between. In constructing this talk, I actually realized that I spent most of my life in the spaces between. In my case, the space between is often referred to as a gap. For example, you have the wealth gap, you have the educational equity gap, and then you have the gender gap. But I've never referred to my circumstances as living in the space between. To me, I just always called it being hecka poor, or going to not that great of a high school, or being raised by an awesome single mom. So first off, I just want to say thank you, TEDxOrangeCoastWomen 2012, for giving me a much better phrase to describe my experience, because this whole time, I've been living in the space between. I think that sounds much better. So my first memory of the space between is actually quite literal. As a boy, I shared a bed with my parents. I still remember it vividly to this day. My mom would sleep on the left side. That's what my mom does, if you don't know. And my dad would sleep on the right side, and me, I would sleep in the space between. And every night before we went to bed, my parents would kiss me on my forehead, and they would whisper to me the same thing. They would whisper, "Persínate, mijo, y sueña con los angelitos." And for all you out there who don't speak California's first language, that just means, "Bless yourself, my son, and sleep with the angels." But despite the sweetness of this nightly routine, I was always left a little confused, because soon after my parents would wish me sweet dreams, their casual conversations always seemed to turn into vicious fights. And words angrily spoken in both attack and defense felt like shards of glass as they were thrown across me. You see, my father always had to have the last word. He needed to be more than right. He needed my mother to be wrong. And if my mother wasn't submissive enough, he would reach over me, pushing my body deeper into our mattress as he did to grab at my mom. And when she would resist, he would grab and pull harder until she became silent. It was then I realized that it's impossible to sleep in this space between. As I grew older, I found sanctuary under our kitchen table. There, I clung to the hope that I'd one day have the family that looked like the pictures I drew for school. Under the table, I felt safe. I was out of the fray. Until one night when my mother fell into view bleeding from the back of her head, and when I would crawl out from under the table to see what had happened, I saw my father standing above her. And later he would stand in the same way as he lied and told the doctor she had slipped accidentally. And so later that night, I too slipped into a new space between. On one side, there was visceral violence, and on the other, there were the unchallenged lives and abuses. And in this new space between, I struggle with an all-encompassing feeling of powerlessness. Without the ability to do much more than to make a promise, I vowed to never, ever be like my father, to never, ever resort to violence. And yet, whenever I saw him beat my mom, I would have done anything to stop him. I wanted to hit him. I wanted him to bleed too. And so, growing up, wanting to free myself of this violence, between wanting to free myself of this violence and the desire to kill someone, I began to hate myself. And in that awkward space between childhood and manhood, I was left with nothing to grow from. See, my father had failed at planting the seed in me that would enable me to grow into the man I wanted to be. And while my mother nurtured me all she could, I still began to drift into delinquency. At school, I was labeled at risk. I fought and argued with my classmates and teachers. I was convinced that no one would ever understand me. While I never slipped into violence like so many young men raised in abusive homes, I was still trapped between rage and hopelessness. It's in these moments that little kids look to superheroes to save them. An Iron Man figure to swoop down and snatch them from despair. Or Spider-Man to web sling into action. Well, my superhero came. And not only did she come right on time, she braved the odds and saved me. She had no cape, no secret weapon, and she came with very little fanfare. In our darkest hour, my brave mother, Alicia Espinoza, is sitting right there. I'm sure you all figured that out by now. Rose to face challenges most men cower at. With limited English and only the ability to offer her blood and sweat into the workforce, my brave mother picked herself up and with me and my 4 siblings in tow, struck it out into a world that would look down on her, exploit her labor, and expect her to keep her finest hour a secret. And while over a decade would pass before any of us would even utter a word of the violence that had defined our childhood, the memories remain vivid. And it was in those years that we slipped into yet another space between. We were safe, but we were not yet healed. And searching for ways to raise my mother out of poverty, college became the answer. But this too became a struggle because you see, I come from a high school where only 7% of low-income students are even eligible to go to college, even eligible to go to university. So being faced by various obstacles, I was about to give up higher education altogether. It wasn't until I was asked one single question that changed my life forever. A woman mentor, Sally Matsuushi, made me ask myself, what struggles have I experienced, and how can I help others currently experiencing those same struggles? Now, I was taken back by this question at first because seldom do people ask those who struggle how they can help others. But what many people don't know is that oftentimes, those who struggle know way more about the problem than those in power. For example, in searching for a solution, I didn't have to think theoretically or abstractly about those living under the weight of domestic violence. I knew immediately what could and needed to be done. So it was this question that enabled me for the first time to transform my memories of pain into something powerful. It was from this question that my In a Box program was born. In a Box provides essential items to women and children living in domestic violence shelters. Through this program, items such as underwear, feminine products such as tampons and pads, and it's always really interesting when I go to Target by myself buying 50 boxes of tampons. It's awkward. I try to break the ice with giving the joke. I'm like, oh, I have really bad nosebleeds. And I'm always laughing, cracking myself up, and the cashier is never laughing, and she's. Through this program, items such as underwear, feminine products, clothes, toiletries, back-to-school supplies for the kids when it's back-to-school season, educational toys, baby supplies, and seasonal gifts are all wrapped up into big, decorated boxes and delivered directly to families living in protective custody. Now, shelter life is safe, but it's isolated. Families living in protective custody can't go to stores like Target or Costco conveniently like we can. They're hiding from someone who's abusive. So in order to make that process less strenuous, In a Box brings what they need directly to them. Our first In a Box was for Mother's Day. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you right now. Growing up, I strongly disliked Father's Day. Big shocker, right? No, I mean, the class assignment was always the same thing. It was to make your dad a card or write your dad a letter of how awesome of a dad he is. Well, you see, I would always change the assignment just a little bit. And my sister's laughing. She knows. And I would make something for my mom instead. And in those moments, I hated the fact I was poor and little. I wanted to make my mom a big breakfast in bed and give her the presents I thought she deserved and would love. So my first In a Box had all the makings of a Mother's Day brunch, gifts for all the mothers that the kids can choose and wrap up and give to them, and a crate full of arts and crafts supplies so that each kid can make their own mom a personalized, awesome Mother's Day card. So we had breakfast and we had gifts, and at first that's all I was going to put in the box. But at the last minute, I decided to include a personal letter of encouragement. In this letter, I spoke for the first time about living through violence and how I was beginning to see my way through. It was in this moment that I finally began to rise out of the space between. This giant trio of boxes wrapped in floral paper and pink bows enabled me to have a glimpse at my life's purpose. Soon there was back to school in a box, Christmas in a box, Halloween in a box, Valentine's Day in a box. Each box attracted more young people who had been floating in the same space between. With every shopping trip and dollar raise, we are creating a movement of people wanting to reconcile the pain of their past by creating a pathway for women and children in need. And for all of us who worked on these boxes, we began to see a brighter future for ourselves. We worked harder in school, studied together for the SAT, and supported each other through the college application process. And while it seemed as if we had finally pulled ourselves out of the space between, it still didn't feel complete. Until one day when I met someone who on paper looks exactly like me. A young Latino from a low-income area raised by a single mother. Now, he looked vaguely familiar. I'm a few years older than him, but I recognize him from my high school track meets since we both ran. And out of nowhere, he approaches me and he asks, this is exactly how it went down. He asks, hey, what's your name? And me, I taken back, I'm just like, hi, I'm Javi, and you are? Since that's how young Latino men interact, right? Actually. And he looked at me with eyes that began to tear up. He then extended his hand to shake mine, and he thanked me. It turned out that earlier that year, he had received a jacket from Christmas in a box. He went on to explain how that jacket, the clothes his two younger siblings received, and that letter I wrote about living through violence and applying to college meant the world to him. In this moment, my life's purpose became clear. College was a necessity, as it was the most effective way to garner the power to confront issues of gendered violence on a large scale. As a women's studies major at the University of Redlands, I've dedicated my complete undergraduate career into understanding the forces behind men's violence against women. And while I've spent a childhood in silence, I now actively participate in violence prevention programming. I've taught workshops to high school students on gender inequality. And currently for my senior thesis, I'm developing a curriculum analyzing gender inequality for incarcerated youth in San Bernardino's Juvenile Hall. Each year in a box grows. We now serve shelters up and down California. And I think these boxes work because they float in that same space between safe and healed. In that space, so many questions arise. Questions like, is being in a shelter right for me? Or how will the world treat me after I'm out of here? Or will I be able to become the person I want to become? Well, my boxes float in this space and in a small but very powerful way, answer these questions and enable hope to rise. So for me, initially thinking about the space between resurfaces memories that I've spent most of my life trying to forget. Memories of me feeling like a powerless coward, pretending to be asleep between my parents as they fought in bed. This is my story. But everybody in this room and everybody watching these talks have experienced pain and struggle before. There isn't a person who hasn't. Throughout history, pain has been the starting point for great movements. It's what motivated Alice Paul to fight for women's suffrage. It's what motivated MLK to fight against racial segregation. And it's what motivated Harvey Milk to run for office in San Francisco to combat homophobia. In confronting our memories of pain, the space between becomes more than empowering. It becomes a critical source of fuel for change. So before I get off this stage, I want to leave you with a question similar to the question I was asked 6 years ago that changed my life. What memories do you have in your own personal space between? And how can you use those memories to transform your pain into power? Thank you. Thank you.